It's meant to be quite a more interactive one. That would be better. Let's just throw them in there. And it's just me taking some time to think about the last 20 years of working in the industry. Some things have changed an awful lot. Some things, when I sat and think about it, haven't changed very much at all. And some things seem to be changing or will change in the future. So just a brief note about myself. I've spent 20 years working in the industry. It's been a combination of, as Steve says, multinationals, time at Cenex, Active Industries, and I've also done some time with consultancies, and I've even worked, I also worked with a geotechnical contractor, so literally 5 years of drilling, ground investigation, reporting on a constant vein. So I've got a fair bit of experience, and I just wanted to share some thoughts with everybody. So thanks for having me down in the southwest. To give a sort of vehicle for talking about these things, it's always nice to try and...
Sorry, Steve, are you able to swap your screens around? Because I think it's sharing something different. I don't know if it's sharing your presenter view.
Did I see the presentation?
We've just seen the first slide at the moment. We did a practice run last time and it all worked perfectly, so we thought, oh, that's great, we're ready to go full on live and do it as a proper hybrid meeting. And of course, everything's broken tonight, so apologies if you are at the other end. That is coming right now, so we can, yeah. Hopefully that will update as well.
We're good, are we?
We'll try again, yeah, thank you.
Okay, here we go again. So to give the presentation a bit of structure, I thought I'd break it down into a few key areas. So first one being data, the type of data we've been collecting over the years, what we've been collecting, is there enough of it, how much might it have changed. Second one being analysis, what the data is actually used for. So I'm a geologist or geotechnical engineer, so a lot of that will have an emphasis on tip stability, design, slope stability, and so on. Then I look to bring it all together. Then I'll talk about the key thing there, which is, when you think about it, it's the relationships you have on site with the people you're working with, the people you're working for, so to speak, the people who are doing stuff for you. And I've got some thoughts on that as well, because when you sit and think about it, the technical stuff actually seems quite easy, but when it's actually when you're working with people and when you're with a good team, everything works really well. You get some really big successes. When the team's not so good for whatever reason, it might be new. It's a very different story. So yeah, that's how we set it up. Now, the first slide, or the next slide, is going to look a little bit technical. I promised it wouldn't be that, but data, you know, it seems to be at the moment, we seem to be. Yeah, at the moment, data seems to be becoming more and more prolific. You know, every time we're able to email each other, giant spreadsheets. You know, I've got one at the moment with about 10,000 points, so I can't even begin to handle properly. So data is becoming something that's more and more. It seems to grow into itself these days. This is something that I want to talk about. So this is probably the most technical slide I've got, and it's just a way of me beginning to write this presentation, think of the types of data that we deal with day to day. So this is the sort of official definitions of the types of data you get. So on one hand, you've got qualitative data, that's the qualities of it, and you've got two kind of grades within that. One being nominal, which is, if you related it to our profession, it would be it's clay or it's limestone, for examples. You're not ascribing a value to it or even what it could be used for, it's just what it is. The next part there is ordinals. You start to put qualities to it that we might want. So the clay might be classed as overburden, the limestone would be mineral. So we're beginning to build up that data set. But then once you start adding numbers to it, you start to become quantitative. So that's, you know, it took me far too long to realize that qualitative, quantitative quantities. It took me years to figure that out, and it shouldn't have. But what we're talking about there is discrete. So discrete quantitative data I envisage with the stuff I was collecting 10 to 15 years ago, maybe. It might be going out with a compass chronometer. You take in a piece of data that you can see in one, you're assigning a certain set of values within a contained area. It's 1 meter, 2 meters, or whatever it might be. In our points, it might be a model or a surface assessment. But now, what I'm finding is you get more of the latter one, which is this continuous data. So these, in my view, are big LiDAR scans or point clouds, where you've got almost an infinite number of possibilities and points. And when I started thinking of data in this way, it made me realize, first of all, like myself, that I almost failed my maths several times when I was studying at school. And then you look at what you need to deal with continuous data, you're in the realm of statistics, probability, and things like that, before you can begin to use it. And, others might use it more than I do, but is that a reasonable thought that we have the mathematics required to understand this data and use it becomes more advanced? Certainly makes me feel that I'm a little bit more behind because I've done that so I can pick it up, but actually some of it seems a bit mysterious to me, so to speak. And I'll be honest about that. And I'm just curious if any other geologists in the room or engineers who use this sort of data, is it I use less of it, so I'm less comfortable with it, or is it actually a sort of a level within it that is hard to
I think
I'm not going to use it.
how the thing depends on how you're using it.
So, yeah, so that's it. So it's these large data sets, and this is the point I'm making about data. It's gone from simple data sets that are quite easy to understand to stuff now that requires a lot of manipulation to get what you want out of it. So, just going back to this data as we've been talking about, how do we go about collecting it? I'm quite traditional in my way, and one of my favourite things, and I don't think I see enough of them, or I try to do them. I admit sometimes I don't do enough of them, but it's a good quality desk study. And I like these for two reasons. One is, if I was dropped, I'll be honest, if I was dropped onto a site and asked a question, I had no idea where the site was. I'd probably struggle to come up with some reasonable answers. Generally say there's limestone or sandstone, but in terms of really being knowledgeable about that site, it's very difficult. So one of the things which I'm always keen on with the desk study, it's amazing what's available online. If you spend a bit of time doing that first, you can actually either save yourself a lot of money when you're planning on doing the investigation. You might find the information's already there. When you are designing the investigation, you might be able to do a much better job. Now, I've never been to Williams Hill before. But very quickly, by looking online, you can find that it's andesite. You've got a set of joints running from north to south. You've got steep bedding running from east to west. So suddenly you've got a very good idea of what this site might be, just by doing a desk study. And from a geology perspective, I've seen that we don't do them as readily as perhaps in civil engineering. Every project, generally speaking, starts with a desk study. So before you even plan for it, you've got a report or document that says you've looked at all the published information. I don't know what you think, John. What do you think of test studies?
Oh gosh, I go back a lot further than you. Data and desk study. Well, desk study is the vital part, because unless you have the data to refer to, you can't really crack on and understand how things might be affected by it. We certainly, as an industry, and people understand people working in the quarry, they get a feel for it. They get a feel how things are going to work. But they haven't really got an understanding. If you step outside the quarry, you say, why is it working that way? What could we anticipate? And so you get that from a wider study with a wider gathering of information.
Yeah.
And that's always very useful for people when they say, well, when something isn't quite right, you say, well, why might it not be right? And then the regional picture may help you there.
No, absolutely. And even now, it's much easier, the various tools in QGIS and all of these things, we can put together really thorough desk study really quickly. To my mind, it's how you design run investigations. That's my background initially. always start with their studies. And I'm a real advocate for that, and I think it's something that we all really need to think about. Next slide. The next sort of slide, I'm just talking about the actual ground investigation itself. And again, I find myself talking terminologies here, but I like to refer to it as ground investigation, not drilling, because the ground investigation encompasses a much wider view of it. And when you say drilling, that's just one aspect of it. Now, and then these are some of what I would expect in the ground investigations. You have your surveys, you have boreholes, in situ testing, and all the rest of it. Now, I'm not going to cover them all. You've got an hour. I just pulled out a few of them that I'd like to just quickly talk about and how they've changed or not changed in the last 20 years. So the first one being, and we've talked about it, but I thought I'd do something a bit more interesting. In situ geotechnical testing. The truth being, when we're drilling boreholes, you take what's called standard penetration tests. So much familiarity with that in this room. Yeah. In essence, it's been used since the 1920s. Most of the buildings across the world that have been built and excavations that have been dug have been based on this test. And it's nothing more than driving a, I think it's meant to see imperial measurements originally. So it's like 1.5 tube into the ground with a 63 kilogram weight dropping over 700 mil. And then literally there must have been millions and millions of them taken across the world. And when I specify ground investigation, I genuinely like to at least put some of these in. We don't necessarily need to do the level that we would be doing block a flat cell or the bridge, but it's always a really good way of understanding how dense the ground is, and therefore what your strength factors might be, doing some analysis. And when I was initially with geotechnics, doing civil engineering ground investigations, we used to do the SPT every meter. You take this test, you do that test, hand shear veins in the boreholes. So you'd extract so much information from a geotechnical sense. When I joined this industry in my next drilling project, I was scraping sand over flight hole, thinking, like, what about the geotechnical information? And sometimes, I think we do miss a trick by not collecting enough. There is an easier way around it with soils that you can use. There's not people who have used it, but cone penetration testing, which you drive into the ground, and that will give you a feel for the density, so you will get various geotechnical parameters that you might need to design tips, etc. But the reason I mention this is that none of this has changed for a very long time. It still hasn't changed since I've been doing it over 20 years. And I can't envisage things changing much in the future. So the boreholes, the collection is still going to be this very hard, mechanical, muddy, cold, whatever. Get in the samples and get in the data. And that's the data that we genuinely need for our work. So
Yeah, I mean, 30 years ago it was the same.
yeah,
The rigs that are actually used to retain the data have changed. But the Challenger rig that you're saying, well, were the standard, have been the standard for the first 30 years. And moved on from that.
Yeah, and there's such a record of them out there that you can use with confidence when it comes to deriving factors within the slope stability analysis. The next thing I was going to talk about is lab testing. The other old favourite, which again, going back to my old job, the amount of lab testing we used to do there was very high. It's compaction testing, moisture contents of samples, liquid limit, plastic limits, all of these geotechnical tests that would be very useful. I think we do them. I wouldn't do them in the industry, but again, I think there could be an opportunity to extract more data from these. Looking at some of the tests again, I think the liquid and plastic limit testing, that's 1920s, 1930s. Particle size distribution, that would have been done, well, hundreds of years, hundreds of years ago. UCS, friction, all of these are really old tests. Again, they haven't changed very much. They're still just as valid. And I think because everybody's familiar with them, there's a whole track record of they'll continue to be the case. We'll be using them as as an industry and again, make the point maybe we need to be doing a few more than this is my point. The other one is groundwater. And I think this is another one which I'm keen to talk about really, because we do a lot of groundwater work in our industry, especially with hydrogeological risk assessments and things like that, which is great, and you can often just capture that information for your excavation designs. But how often do we drill our tips and have a good understanding of what the groundwater is doing now? You know, it's a much harder ask as a geologist to go and ask for, you know, money to put a borehole in an area that you've backfilled. But sometimes I think that it's information that we miss out upon. And we were talking earlier, John, there's two ways around it as a geotechnical engineer. Then you either, you wouldn't ignore it, but you end up with an overcautious design then, because you have to assume that everything is worst case. You might be losing value, so the drilling might pay for itself anyway, but I would like to see a bit more in terms of boreholes and water.
Well, I think in the industry, confirmation of prediction is something we don't do. We predict it, it hasn't fallen down, so we said we must be right. And we don't know when it's wrong because we haven't monitored it to find out. And that can lead to quite serious issues. But again, it might, exactly as you say, you might be over conservative.
Yeah.
And you could do an awful lot more. But because you haven't got the data, you can't get anybody to sign up for it. So it's the collation of data. And we've moved an awful long way in groundwater monitoring in the last 20 years and 30 years. And so it is available. It is more easy to collect that data, but it does need a certain amount of investment to get it.
Must have a big advocate of data loggers actually. You know, not to get too technical, but they're brilliant. You know, if you put the boreholes in, that's one thing, but someone's got to go and measure the water levels. You put a data logger in, you just download it every so often. Very good record, and even you can set triggers on it.
Yeah,
But I just think that groundwater is something that we don't, you know, I'm talking about data here, so groundwater is something that I feel, certainly in tips, we don't measure enough or could measure more of going forwards. We have more confidence in our designs, and as you say, John, we might find that you can be less conservative in your design parameters. You know, more happy to say this stuff.
Do you see there's a risk of, you know, when you're trying to kind of get operations managers or accountants, you know, looking at the budget of, well, £5 of extra testing, what's it going to get me? And is that a challenge in terms of communicating the benefits of that and getting persuading people, you know, not just these days in the previous roles?
I think the key thing is, again, this is just reflecting on what I felt in the end, I suppose, is that it's almost incumbent on you as the engineer to really sell that. You know, I think it's, and I try to resist the doom and gloom approach. So we don't do it, it's all going to collapse and everything's going to fall apart. You know, I think it's more a case of saying, you know, there's a benefit here. The more information we've got, the less conservative we can be about design, more confident in it, and everybody will sleep better, basically. You know, so I think it's incumbent to try and push it, but do it in a certain way. You know, do it in the, is that reasonable, Stephen?
Yeah, well, it's outweighing the benefits, isn't it? You know, against the finance.
Yeah, it's just, you know, some of these things, if we really got into it, you know, we wouldn't have to spend a great deal. We could go and drive probes into it. You know, it's just being flexible and creative and thinking about these things and all working together.
It's also confidence in your design. If you made a prediction and you can say, yeah, it's been proved right, and you can build up that confidence in the team and say, yeah, we made good predictions. We can demonstrate that they were accurate, and you can sell it so much more easily. You can sell it much more easily.
Yeah, so that's groundwater. So I don't think they change very much, is what I'm saying. So the way you collect lab data, borehole data, and groundwater, that's in my mind very similar. You know, it hasn't changed very much. The ones that has changed a lot, of course, the topographic surveys, in terms of how you would go about it. You know, the days of a surveyor going out for 3 days and surveying everything and coming back, they seem to, I would say quite common, we still see the odd one, but generally passive, and now we move into a world of UAVs and surveys that can capture the data much more quickly, a lot more effectively as well. You get a much higher resolution survey. I think the other part which has also stood out to me is the fact that the computers are more powerful as well. is it reasonable to suggest that the drones and that sort of tech is kind of, I wouldn't say old, but very available? It's the computers that have transformed it with the ability to take all these hundreds of photographs and form them into a point cloud. So that's where the transformation has been. And some of them sites, I think, are amazing when you've got these huge point clouds in the site and you can pick up every discontinuity, every whatever you like out of it. That is a big positive going forward. Although I do remember doing discontinuity surveys the old-fashioned way, which I would say I've seen plenty of sites now where you've got a whole range of reports. I don't name consultants or whatever, but you've got very old reports which might have designed the site based on 4 days worth of scan line surveying to get discontinuities, and you've got those designed on millions of points from a very detailed point cloud survey. Rather, in a very positive way, the designs are very close to one another. I think that's really good. It shows that both techniques can work. So you don't have to do that, but it also gives you confidence that the newer approaches are valid as well. I think I took it was one site where we did something for 4 days taking strike and dip data. All it showed was the data was random. There was no linear site, there was no pattern whatsoever. At least they showed something, to be fair, but it wasn't much reason. And the other bit I would mention as well, actually talking about data, is going on with discontinuity data. We can get a great deal from these new point clouds and scanning and so on. But what I always enjoy doing and seeing is the down the hole geophysics, where you can pick up the joints actually behind where you're going to. So it's all very well known what's in the face, but I think the borehole down the hole geophysics is an excellent way of understanding what you're going into. Because I think it's all, you are making an assumption that what you see in the face goes back on you whenever you're using a survey. So I think that's valid a lot of the time. But I am a big advocate of doing the down the hole stuff. I think it gives you some good data. I don't know if anybody else uses that often.
Well, I think if you're a worker up against the face, it's the next 20 meters that counts. It's not the next 300 meters. And if something changes in that next 20 meters that could impact you, a walk in a discontinuity line is so easy. It's likely to happen.
Yeah.
And so people can then so knowing where it is in the next 20 meters is quite important. To understand the variations you might get. It is very, very important for people, and that comes from working close to the face. You can see it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, but I think so. In terms of collecting discontinuity data, yes, we've got the modern stuff that we pick up on the surface, but I still like those that go down the boreholes as well, and even logging the boreholes as well, and understanding what the joints are, what they're made up of. I don't think we can forget about that way of collecting.
I'm sorry, it sounds like all I care about is the finance of another. In terms of value for money, that's one of the best tools, I think, in terms of the data you can pick up. You can send a surveyor or a geologist or somebody to site for 2 days to go and collect the data that one of those will pick up in a day.
What's that in terms of the?
You can do a lot of fracture mapping, scanning of faces and stuff. Whereas you pick up 12 boreholes and get 12 big data sets with one of those. Yeah, it still needs a bit more interpretation afterwards, but yeah, in terms of quick, relatively cheap data.
Well, absolutely, and that's the thing with the data sets. Then digressing slightly, but when you do end up with these big stereo nets, I don't know. I always you end up putting poles in effectively, don't you, to work out what your average is. The average is different to what you've got in that area, isn't it? So it's going back to that first slide, which got me thinking. You've taken this continuous data set that's really detailed, and before you know it, you're turning it into something that's far more discrete, aren't you, by taking an average or whatever. So I think that's that bit me thinking about this. I've got these big data sets, you build in probabilities, then the statistics start to come into play, don't they? Which hands up, I'm not that comfy with. So I think that's something I'm figuring out to do as I'm moving forward. So just another slide showing through this. So I've just moved into the key points then on this one. So constantly working with different types of geological data, and I think as a geologist, you're constantly moving it from one to the other as well, or you potentially, start off with very broad data, get really small, and when you want to transmit it back into a working design or something that's usable, you end up going back the other direction. So I think there's a whole loop of data, which I really, just this whole process of putting this together makes you see it in that way. And I think it's important then to understand when you're reducing it or cleaning bits out or whatever you're doing, are you putting the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak? Are you missing something that could be important, or are it's the old Einstein quote, isn't it? Make everything as simple as possible, but never simpler. You just don't want to go too far with this. So I think that's the first part of the data sets. And I think that when you start reflecting on how you start collecting the geotechnical data that we use, that's pretty unchanged. The boreholes are still very similar, the types of testing you do is similar, the map data is similar. It's almost a bit routine and boring into the new stuff. So I think that's something else that bear in mind for you to keep on that. And the new stuff is brilliant. It adds a whole extra dimension to it all. But personally, I just want to make sure that I'm able to use it and understand it well enough that I can use it with confidence and not wonder if I'm missing something. Right, just this will just be a quick fly through geotechnical analysis. It's not to teach analysis, but it's to just show where this data now begins to fit in. So we've gone and collected the data and how it would be used. So when you do, geotechnical assessment, geotechnical analysis, well, geotechnical assessments when it's a significant hazard, we all know that. But should be doing it anyway for anything we do within reason. I wouldn't suggest we do it for a 1 meter high building, but in most cases, even if it isn't significant, I think we should be doing these analyses just to build up the body of work and understanding. And
We'll put the fear factor, people, that if you look at the regulation, you are required to have a factor of safety or some other code that you're actually working to. So you demonstrate that your design or your conclusions are based on something that somebody can test.
Yeah, and it's designed to be stable, isn't it?
Well, that's another issue. Yeah. You might design it not to be stable in different circumstances. I'm not saying necessarily, well, outside the UK, certainly, we decide through outside the UK, that would say, well, falls down tomorrow, it's not a problem, which is true. So yeah, we are a confined country from that point of view. So it's whether you designed for it to be stable depends on your circumstances.
Yeah,
and that's fine enough.
I think that's it. But Hopkins said about the best mine collapses the day after you finish. You designed it optimally, which again, it's not there. How we do business here, is it? So that's when you might do it. And I just picked on I've got 4, but I might not cover all 4. So just the limit equilibrium, smoke stability, a bit of chat about kinematics, rockfall and settlement analysis. Now, this is probably the type of analysis I've done most often. And if anybody else would agree with that in terms of what we do, I know we do a lot of rock stuff these days, but in terms of geotechnical assessments, most sites, well, this way, not all sites will have rock excavations, but all sites will tend to have geotechnical soils, be it tips, stockpiles, etc. So this is the one that I use more than any, I would say, by a long shot. Again, looking at the age of it, 1955. This used to be this is a hand calculation that we just brought into computers, so the computers now do it. And it was a pretty, you read about how they used to do it, and it was a pretty long-winded way of doing it, because you divide the slope up into slices, you work out what force is pushing it down, you work out what forces you've got holding it up, you add all the slices up, and then if you've got more holding it up and pushing it down, you've got a positive factor of safety, and vice versa. But you have to put a curve in first. So you don't know if that's the lowest factor of safety. So you do it once, you do it again, and you do it again. And the idea would be you do a whole bunch of these, and you end up with the lowest one, which would give you an indication of factor of safety, but also where the failure might occur as well, if you've got the parameters put in. Nowadays, the computer just takes it and runs.
I'll give you an idea, guys. First time I tried to do that one, coming out of college back in the early mid-70s. We had to program a mainframe in Geneva to do the work for us. So you can imagine the modem sending the information across to come back with the answer, and that took 2 days. Now you just push a button on your, most people can do it on your phone.
Buy an app for £2.99.
Yes, tonight. Well, I'm sure they're free. You get the answer if you have the data, but in the format they go in, you'll get the answer, which means you can do thousands of calculations and still and get a much better picture of what might actually happen. So the answers are better now. But as you say, the basics are much the same.
It's exactly the same. And the thing is, when you look at what you put into it, then you put your shear strength parameters. So that's your phi value and your cohesion value. You collect them either through SPTs, potentially if it's granular, or by lab testing. So we're going back to where the data that you need
The data
is within those techniques that are perhaps not as common as I'd like them to be. Next on kinematic analysis. This is the one way I really like this slide. I'll touch on in a sec. But the whole idea of this sort of stereographic projection where you take planes and put them into a surface and make them into one point, so you can really analyze a lot of them. It actually goes back to the ancient Greeks in terms of when it was first brought forward, and then people realized in the 1850s it could be applied elsewhere. So again, this is a really old technique, taking your discontinuity data, plotting it up, and then the stuff that we collect with UAVs and LiDAR now will get plugged into one of these projections. And this is one of the best slides I've seen for showing what it all means, and that's the random. So all your joints are scattered everywhere. So effectively, your biggest risk of failure is a circular failure, because it's like a spine effectively. It hasn't got the dominant joint set. And you know, if you've got a cluster that causes planar failure, they would look like that. If you've got two clusters, you've got wedges, and if you've got a cluster the other side of the face, you've got toppling. So this is a really nice way of, when you see these stereo plots in your reports, it's a very easy way to see what they all mean and how it all works. But for this one, you know, you are collecting discontinuity data. So this is where perhaps the LiDAR and the new techniques really help. But again, this is where the boreholes really help, because you're actually testing what you haven't drilled yet or haven't worked yet. Because as I've been reminded plenty of times, once it's gone, you can't put it back. I mean, that's the problem of our industry. And then the other one, then, not fault analysis, which you know I've used a fair bit of. I never feel entirely happy with it, if I'm being honest. I do kind of trust it, but I kind of don't as well, because it's all based on probability. So even when you end up doing your rockfall analysis, and then you've got 98% chance that it's fine. And it's like, what about 2%? Is that okay? Is 2% enough, or do you want 100%? So, and it is probabilistic as well. So you could run the same analysis a few times, you might end up with slightly different results. So I'm kind of happy with it, but I think in this instance, you know, the experience and the rules of thumb that a quarter of the face size is often enough is good. You know, I think that's been proven to work. And then if you had a quarter of the face side or a sophisticated analysis that says you'll be fine at 1/8, I'd still be more comfortable with what we've seen practically work over the years.
It's practice that's when it comes down to it. Of course, one quarter of the face height and 1/8 of the face height for the bounce that you're going to get comes from Ritchie from the 1960s, and all he did was toss rocks over a cliff. And kind of, well, he didn't have any computers. He was posed a question when he was down in the Colorado School of Mines. Now, how are we going to stop the Rockies killing people who are driving on the road? So that's what he did. But it's not as simple as that. To be fair to Ritchie, he said there's different angles and different approaches. What works in any one, but you're exactly right. Any computer program cannot really reflect by prediction what's going to be looking like on your particular faces at any one particular time, and you can do repeated analysis, and you will always get the stray boulders that will go outside that analysis.
Yeah. I just think, you know, this is one of the instances where I think works, you know, stick with what works to a point, but also just be mindful. And again, this is if I'm correct, Monte Carlo analysis, isn't it? We take variables and randomize them,
Calculations.
which
It's called Monte Carlo.
which is stretching my maths again because I'm not looking at it. But yeah, so that's this rockfall analysis. And I'll just touch on settlement at the end, because this is kind of my spend a bit of time looking at this. And it's something again that can be overlooked really, but everybody thinks of settlement when you're dealing with a quarry, that you put weight on the ball, in general, you put weight on the ground and then the ground compresses. Well, actually, there's another way of looking at it, that if the ground is saturated, that material is buoyant. So by being buoyant, it's actually lighter than it would be if it was unsaturated. So when you've got a quarry and you dewater these quarries, you will actually need sound. There's no doubt about it. And funny enough, it came up in I dialed into a planning committee the other day, and it came up in the committee about a property that was close to the quarry and whether or not settlement would be an issue. And two things stood out. The first one was there was a report, which is good, and it said that it would probably end up a settlement that would be like that, and that's why I think you get away with it. You drop the water table quite flat, so everything drops. You don't end up with things cracking. The planning authority basically said, yeah, we can't deal with that. You know, it's not a planning issue. We kind of pushed it through, which in geotech, that's almost quite concerning in a way. That, you know, it wasn't, the permission was granted, and they just said we can't. It's private property, so we can't do this. It was I can't remember, no legal expert in that regard, but they decided that we can't comment on it, or we can't refuse it on the basis of that. So I think that's something else which.
Because of course the people lowering the water table will still be liable. In other words, if you lower the water table and you crack somebody's house like this, you will still be liable for it. You can't escape liability. And so you really need to take it into account in advance.
With this sand and gravel site, to give you an idea, I think this sand and gravel site, the house is about 50 metres from it. We're dropping the water by about 6 metres. And the calculation showed 19 mil of settlement.
It really affects services. Take out the drainage. That could be quite serious for
But yeah, so you know, that's just another way of doing analysis. I think that's one area which we are being asked to do a lot more in the future. And that's the first part of this presentation, just about done now. And then this is one of my I've mentioned to others already, but keep in mind when it comes to data at the moment, and it's a cognitive bias is what everyone would call it. It's the street lamp effect. And the story goes that there was a guy, we can see on there, but the guy was looking for his keys under the lamp. Some other chap comes over and says, what were you looking for? I've lost my keys. You lost them here. No, I've not lost them here, but the light is much better here. I can see them. And the idea is that you spend your time looking for the answers, looking for what's important and it's easier, rather than actually what we should be looking for. I think in my mind with this, it's, you know, the dark outside of the street lights would be things like your geotechnical parameters and boreholes, having a good understanding of your water table, knowing your ground parameters for settlement and whatever else it might be. So I'm just mindful that as a sort of reflection myself, really, that, you know, sometimes it's hard to find what you're looking for, and you've actually got to do that to make an impact rather than collect lots of data somewhere else, because it's much easier to do so. I think that's the point I'm making. It's something I'm mindful of myself.
Well, looking for easy data, I mean, you can get vast quantities of data from LiDAR and something else, and I'm thinking, yeah, but do I need this much data? Is it going to take me any further? It's the bits I don't, it's the dark areas. Well, we can't address really from that point.
Yeah.
Or how do we get to that information? And it can be very hard and very expensive to get it.
Yeah, and that's
one of those issues. I mean, the Mendips, you might think of me aware, do the cavities of caves go? Where are your conduits? It's extremely difficult to predict. It's extremely difficult to get the data. And even what data you've got can be confusing, but they could have a big impact.
So that's just my whiz through data and analysis, really. That, you know, a lot of it hasn't changed. Some of it has to the better, but actually going forwards, what might be important is still going to be really hard, bloody, and expensive to get. And it's, you know, making sure that we get that data to do the analyses, of course, we still rely upon it because we've had them for the last centuries and decades.
I don't know, but even with all the new tools, new sources of data, and new analytical methods and software, do you think the product that a quarry manager will see at the end of the day, whether the excavation is going to be stable or not, do you think that's fundamentally changed in any way? Or actually, we've got a lot more confidence, or is it, what, in that sense of the end product, no different from what we were getting kind of 20 years ago when the regs first started?
I think that where the biggest changes have been is that not so many. Obviously, I think everything's improved in the last 20, but the biggest is I think everybody's on site day to day, have a much better understanding of what's going on with things. It's all this training that gets done and things means that people are less likely to do things they shouldn't do, and also raise things that seem wrong. So I think, yes, I think things have improved.
Well, and I think also, well, we will move on as people are aware that you can collect data of this nature. I mean, I think one of the various, which is not really what we're talking about tonight, but yeah, for instance, do you get the blast you want? How do we know we're getting the blast we want? We can get a data set on that almost straight away. LiDAR will pick it up, you'll get the size of the fragmentation you've got. You might look back at the data that's been collected, what the fracture patterns you've got, and say, well, why aren't we getting the blast we want? Cheapest way to break the rocks in the blast, yeah, we can save a lot of money if we get it right every time. Every time we blast, we get the blast we want. And that will feed into back the data you've got, and then into the design, and you'll get that modification in design suddenly. And say, well, we could change our blast pattern tomorrow. It's not just that we're going to get the same blast week after week after week, and we're not going to think about it. We're going to look at the data. Have we got what we wanted? If we don't get what we want, but what are we going to change? And it's easy to change it if you have the data. And people can look at it.
Well, just one thought of that though, John. When you get these big data sets, going back to that thinking, that you end up simplifying it to turn it into a useful, is there
Well,
enough
okay,
resolution in what we
we
do?
can talk about that. Well, don't divert too far into those, but there is a great deal of work that can be done. And I tell you now that artificial intelligence, that's the sort of thing, the big data sets that the machines will start working on. And that will be interesting. And it'll be relatively available.
Still, I think I just one touch on that. I Googled something the other day. All these artificial intelligence things can draw things, isn't it? It's like you take the kind of sort of draw a horse. Man was the wildest horse I've ever seen. 6 legs and 3 tails or something. So I think AI has got a point, but I think there's been again, it's not having that truthing and understanding. Is it realistic?
Yes, it will come and does it work for you? Does it produce a horse? So you think it's working?
So yes, that wraps up the first part then. The last part I wanted to talk about, and this is me being, say, reflecting on the years of the working relationships you've had and how they not just impacted yourself, the people around you, but also, I think, genuinely the quality of the work as well. What you can have with them, and how things go, and whether everybody enjoys the journey, so to speak, or whether it's a graft all the way through. So again, I'm just trying to put some sort of logic to it all. And I put this all up on it's something like the slide at some point, but it's all based on a guy called Edgar Schein, which I quite like, and he's a business consultant. And a very subtly different way of doing things to most others, where instead of turning up and you pay me this big pile of money and I got all the answers, it's like, you still pay me the money, but really you've got all the answers. I just take in what you're saying and so on. So it's all philosophies of humble inquiry, humble consulting. It's turning up pretend you don't know and building a picture that way. But one of the things he does really put forward in a very good way, I think, are the type of relationships that he finds in workplaces and teams of organizations that do really well, or those that at times struggle. So, I'll read out the key points, but the first one you've got is like a stranger level. You might go past that person and say hello, and that's about it. And I think sometimes we all do that, and I think that's fine to a degree. But if you're in a team where you're meant to be working together, you probably need a bit more interaction than that. Then when you start moving on to role defined, I think this is one personally. It's a danger I could slip into. That I just do this one thing. I'm going to turn up, do this one thing, and go. And, that's my contribution as a team player. So bearing in mind, these are all how you might be in a team, or how a team might be. You could have a team of well-defined relationships where everybody just does their job, which is in many ways fine. But where the companies really start to push forward is when they develop these more personal relationships, so that the people in the team know a bit about one another. They know what pressures they might be under, generally speaking. They might know what the other one's trying to do, or struggling with, or doing very well with, and so on. So I think once you start building those personal relationships, things begin to improve. So, just in my mind, just think of a drilling project, where you've got, stranger, you just turn up and I'm the job, I'm just going to drill a borehole. Off you go. Might be bogged down or something, and there's nobody supporting you then, or vice versa. But once you start getting into personal relationships and the more close ones on the site, where you trust one another, you know what everybody's doing, you're more inclined to ask for a bit of help. You might even receive help without asking for it because somebody spotted it. And if you just bring that into how projects, even if quarry design works, if you've got a team that's level 3 or level 4, I think you're going to get a much better outcome, much more quickly as well. And I possibly got an example I talk about there. You get to where you need to be a lot more quicker, a lot more quickly if you've got a good relationship. So what are the benefits? And if you've got these higher level 3 and 4 relationships, you've got better teamwork. Morale can be higher. Everybody's picking one another up if necessary or whatever. You get more done, I think. Personally, I can think of teams where I've been in where it's been really good that you do get more done because you think, well, X is relying upon me to do this, so I'm going to make sure I get that done for them. And you've got a bit more of a skip in your step, perhaps, because you're enjoying yourself, you feel like you're part of a good team. You grow better, you personally, you learn more, you understand more about what's going on in areas outside of your general remit. So I think that's been important to me as well. I always, too much sometimes, enjoy learning about stuff that's outside of my day to day, but I think that actually, more often than not, really helps, because you need to understand where you fit into this whole process and what you're doing, how it impacts, how it might not impact, and so on. So I was running through some quick examples. We do not pay for time, it's about 10 minutes left. I think these could work. So, teamwork, combined effort, and I've got an example of this one actually, which is the BBC. You might know John down there, but that's Benford Reservoir, that is, and there's a dam that crosses there. And I think back in about 2004, they actually drilled boreholes all along that dam. At the time, South West Water were concerned that they didn't know how it was built. But and if it was, whether it was 2 walls of stone with clay in the middle, or whether it was solid concrete. If it was the latter, they'd be fine. If it was the former, they'd be a bit concerned. So I turned up on site. There was, you can't see there, there's a building at the bottom where there's a guy who looked after that end of things, the pump house or whatever was down there. The consultant engineer met me up on top and said, yeah, let's drill this boreholes. So most of the way along, one day, I think I needed to use the phone or something like that, popped down to see the chap at the bottom. And it was like, so what are you doing? I said, oh, well, just waiting to prove what it's made out of. I said, you'd be glad to know it's made out of concrete. How would you know that? What do you mean? Come in here. Took me into his office. He had all the photographs, the Victorian times when they were building. And they had a filing cabinet for the actual blueprints from when it was built. But because nobody had actually considered him part of that team, on that site, we ended up doing all this extra work. Just proved right away that just ask him to speak to the guy, but for some reason at the time, nobody thought to do that. So that's my, whenever I think of things like that, that's my idea of teamwork. Everybody has got an involvement and bring something that actually is beneficial throughout. So yeah, that's my view on teamwork. And again, going to that level 3 and level 4, caring about what each other's doing and why they're doing it. That's when you get to that point. You don't get to it, you just.
And it ties back to your first slide on the desk study. Somebody sits down and says, what do we know already?
Yeah, desk study.
And who might know? And can I go and talk to them?
Yeah, exactly. So that's my thought on teamwork anyway. And then the next one is morale, I suppose. I don't probably put too deep on that, but if you do have, aggregate industry surveys, what's the question they ask if you've got a best friend at work, isn't it? Which everybody wants that mean kind of thing. But I think if you're in a good team where everybody cares about one another, again, morale is high. So when you're in those inevitably difficult positions, when again, my type of job, the drill rig is stacked, all the samples in the bottom of the field, the stack of coal boxes you don't know what to do with, it's all of these things when you've got a big team around you. You get it done and you don't get bogged down in it. So I think morale is important, and that's again get another reflection over the years. Again, it's almost like it's obvious, isn't it? If you all know one another and you're working well as a level 3 or level 14, you're going to be more productive. I think, I don't know if anybody would challenge that otherwise, you know, that's, you know, obvious, isn't it? But again, you know, just before I move on to the last one, is the point from my perspective here is that I do like to have a conversation when I go to site, perhaps put my nose in where it's not necessary, I should say, not it's not needed, hopefully, but where it's not necessary, but it is an important part of, you know, working in this industry, doing a good job and getting better results as well. You know, it's not just social element, it's just genuinely, it's the right thing to do for business. And if you work as a geologist, that's something I think is important. And then finally, personal growth, I just live past the personal growth from again as a sales principle. The other one I'm going to talk about then is creativity, and that's the last one. I think an example I've got here of one of the teams that I used to work in my old place, and it just so happened, you know, it was like the estates planning team, operational team, me, myself. We'd all, at that point, I think we worked together for 10 or 12 years, so we all knew each other really well. Wanted to try and get an extension for a quarry for a few years. Couldn't quite get it to work, you know, because the planning wasn't great. And then somebody came up one day, well, I know X, he likes his rowing. So then, anyway, cut to the chase, it became a really late into it. And then you start working together then to figure out how big it needs to be. I can throw a bit of a design together, plan it out to look at it. That's good. Speak to the right people. Realize then that you've got to shift a lot of overburden. Make sure that's still acceptable and balanceable. And that was a great idea of creativity, but it happened so quickly as well. That's the key part. It wasn't a long drawn out affair. I think it's because, again, high performing team or whatever you want to call it, it meant that we got from A to B in just a few weeks rather than perhaps a lot of bouncing back and forth to try and get to where we got to in the end. And just the last one, we are near the end now. Just a bit of Quinn Jack to cut, but just on creativity. This is one of my favorite things about creativity. Does anybody have an idea what some people think the most important invention of the last century was in the 1900s? So I showed some of these. But I really like this because it was a chap called Malcolm McLean, who lived in America. Couldn't afford to go to college, so he became a truck driver. And he was during his days chatting to people, driving his trucks to the docks, watching them being unloaded onto the boats. Then knowing at the other end, somebody's unloading a boat onto a truck. Just thought, well, why can't I just drive my truck onto the boat and drive it off the other end? Surely that would be quicker. Anyway, it didn't quite work out. He spoke to others and said, yeah, you can do that, but you can't leave a truck on the boat because it takes up space. Okay. What happens if I create something at the back of the truck that I can leave on there? And before you know it, he's transformed the whole global economy effectively, just by one chap thinking we could do this differently. And just to put money on it, Doctor, I know you like this. The unit shipping cost beforehand was $6, reduced it to 16 cents. So naturally become a very wealthy man. But I like this idea of creativity. It's not about paintings, music. It's genuine. It's something that can be looking at you all along. Somebody just thinks of a different way of looking at it. And again, that's just something over the years I've picked up that, you know, the best ideas come from everybody at any sort of time. It's always worth having these relationships, knowing people, keeping track of that to understand that the next good ideas around the corner from this route now. So.
Yeah, it's especially true, I think, in kind of quarry design and phasing when you're trying to work out how the excavation and quarry is going to evolve over time. You know, sometimes it does take being quite creative, like you say, to get it past planning and come up with a scheme that's going to work and satisfiable.
I think everything in our industry is creative. No two quarries the same. There's no blueprint for a quarry. Everything has to be bespoke. So we all kind of contribute in a completely new way of doing things, and that's how we all work.
So when you've got a manager who knows the neighbour and knows what's going to be acceptable or not to that stakeholder, yeah.
it all matters and just bring all the ideas in. So that wraps up my presentation. Also, just a few, just to summarise the main points there before we move on. Use lots of different types of data all the time, converting it between this complicated sort of mathematical continuous data to usable or qualitative data. Technology's improved, but a lot of what we need and a lot of what we need to use is still decades, if not centuries old. The type of analysis is the same. Note to myself, be aware of the street light effect all the time. Hopefully that's one takeaway for this room. Just because it's easy, that's maybe not where you need to be. And then there's high level working relationships that are critical. So it's always worth fostering them and making sure that you do the best to make them good. And it's not time wasted, it's time invested, I would say, to make solutions. Yeah, I've got one next, but I haven't got any slides after one next. I'll check it out to the roof there. Let's go. I'll stop there and take any questions or thoughts.
Do you have any questions around the room?
What do you think? What's next?
How much information do you share with BGS?
How much do we share with BGS? I think it goes in spades. I think we collect a lot. Personally, we collect a lot of information, and then somebody will say, "Well, we haven't sent it to the BGS because, forgive me, I'm not sure what the depths are. If the bore goes below a certain depth, provide it to the BGS, and equally, there's no harm in providing the data. So we do, but I wouldn't say it happens on a regular, like Monday basis. It happens every so often when we decide we need to do that. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, it's obviously we're using their own historical data. It's just that our people are topping that up now with more modern data.
Yeah, absolutely. And we in this industry are not the greatest, but certainly the civil engineering companies are still constantly. You can find out where the next roads are going to be sometimes with all the strips of boreholes across the BGS website. So yeah, we do our best, but it doesn't always go.
You mentioned a 299 app that's going to do geotechnical assessments. Am I out of a job?
But the last little point does the analysis. I'm a big believer in the analysis of that assessment. That's the two things, isn't it?
Oh gosh, yes. That's well. I'm going to talk in a minute. We're the QuinJack, which is the Quarry National Joint Advisory Committee, which for those people in the room go back that far, started up in sort of 1993. As a collection of people trying to actually, driven by the health and safety executive, really trying to say, well, the accident records were so bad, you must be able to do something about it. And they had this triumvirate of the health and safety executive, the industry, and the trade unions got together and formed a committee to talk about how do we improve, what do we want to do. So I'm heading off. Yeah, geotechnical assessments. I've been working with that committee since about 2004. And I sat on a working group trying to talk about training relating to the new regulations that have come in. So I've got a few, just 4 slides which I'm going to talk about. But just to warn you, one of the things, the last slide will say what's the next piece of guidance we're trying to consolidate and get agreement on, which is the content of geotechnical assessments. Because if you walk around the industry, you pick up, and I've worked 35 years with the various versions of aggregate industries, starting off with English China Clays, through CAMAS, through aggregate industries, and then the wholesome business, and then working in consultancy as well. I've read dozens of geotechnical assessments, produced dozens of geotechnical, some of which I'm not particularly proud of, for one various reason or another. And the consistency in these is not there. It's just not there. Now, the industry, we have 2 issues about that. It's cost, which they do go for the cheapest cost, because it's dead easy. We'll just go around, we'll send it out to consultancies, we'll see what the price comes back, and we find one. And you're focusing on the price. And I think what I would like to draw from that relationship business, going back to your relationship side, where you are with your geotechnical assessment. If you're in number 1 slot, In other words, you know the names, but you don't really know how they produce the result. You're in a lot of, you're in jeopardy to some extent. Jeopardy in many ways. Financially, you might be in jeopardy because you're paying for something you're not going to get very much value out of. If there's an incident in there, you don't know why it's happened inside that geotechnical assessment. You don't know how they've arrived at the result. And to produce a geotechnical assessment, we're trying to get in people's minds, you have to take everything into account. The regulations do not limit you in any way. They say you are required, this is the geotechnical specialist, it's required to take all factors, and part of that's the competency of the workforce, the quality of your data, you know, time spans, time constraints and quarry design. What can you do in the time periods you have in front of you to manage these issues? Unless you have a full appreciation of that and trust what people are going to tell you, data you've got thrown at you, it's going to be very difficult to get that full geotechnical assessment in place. And so and the next thing is that you pick up some of the past geotechnical assessment and say, I have no idea why they've come to these conclusions. They're supposed to put their conclusions based on data, but the data is extraordinarily limited. I can't extract that. So it is a very significant thing. We're trying to get to this collaboration inside the industry and understanding of outside the industry where we're going to take it. Geotechnical assessments are only the end of the process. So it's trying to get that relationship built up between people. You get your data in, you share your data. I don't know, people have been involved in acquisitions from one, as you pass from one company to another, data stuff's not there, it disappears, it's gone. We have one little pressure on making account. The accountants look at the money and the due diligence on the financial aspects of it. But when it comes to due diligence on the geotechnical aspects of it, we sort of have absolutely nothing to base it on. We don't know if your designs are positive, accurate or not. Even if I can get hold of your geotechnical assessments and read them before they're in place, I can't necessarily verify that result. And so are the designs actually appropriate? Will they meet it? So we are trying to get industry much more confident about that and data sharing, which will be very useful. From that point
I think over the past as well, the geotechnical reports have come and they put on a.
they put
in
snapped
the
up,
office.
snapped up.
They looked up. I think they've done a good job over the last 10 years in training people, even down at level 2 with operators, globe cards and stuff.
Well,
And I think we are educating people much better.
the competence of the workforce is risen dramatically in my time. But also the expectation of the workforce, I need to be competent. I don't just do what I'm told. I need to know why I'm doing this because it makes a big difference. And of course, that goes into your relationships. That 1, 2, 3, 4. It comes back to this. If you're coming into level 3 and level 4, if you check both level 4, the ones I've noticed on level 4, this is quite good. It's where you have something that hasn't been planned, an absolute emergency. AI people here, most probably none of you are old enough to realize when they put the crusher in the bottom of the pit. We had external consultants design the primary conveyor coming out, the primary surge pile, and the secondary conveyor to take that material out into the primary, the secondary and tertiary plant. Now he was a very good pretty accredited civil engineer, had done his calculation, but he failed to account for the pressure generated by the stockpile, the surge pile at the bottom. On his supports for his primary conveyor. He had a very sophisticated design for the primary. He supported on columns, vertical columns. And these were pre-stressed, perfectly capable of taking the load of the conveyor. And he'd assumed that the surge pile would actually be generated in a nice smooth way around these columns, perfectly evenly. Of course, it came off the end of the conveyor and it stacked up on one side. So the positive pressure of that material on one side of the columns was pushing the primary conveyor down towards the crusher, and they can measure it in centimeters, keeping down, and it was going to buckle the primary conveyor. And they just threw their hands up. They said, "We don't know what to do." And it was the team of people and said, "Well, what can we do?" They couldn't stop the production of the plant at that time because they said, well, the cost is going to be too high. We've already had this long pause while constructing, put in new primary crusher. The other one's shut down. The whole plant looks as if the quarry is going to have to stop production for about 9 months while we solve the problem, which would be a major catastrophe, for particularly for, as it was Camas at that particular time, because Croft was the major generator of revenue. Not necessarily the major generator of profit, but the major generator of revenue, which is again why you need to know. But it was the local team that sat down and said, what can we do? We have to keep the conveyor working. We have to keep the things going. So what can we do? And it was the team of people sitting down there, people who knew each other, trusted each other to do it. And we couldn't get an outside consultancy to do it because they said they can't take the risk. It's something that you can't run the conveyor while you're actually doing something about it. And that work was put in that. And very successful. They actually then shifted, instead of being supported on columns, they decided it was going to be supported on a bridge. There's another support, there's a bridge underneath it, and underneath the bridge on the top of it, suspend it on the top. Anyway, you can look at the photographs and see how they're designed. And as it happened on that particular time, I was called in and saying, can you design rock anchors? Because we need to hold one end of this bridge against the existing faith. Discontinuities, looking at it, you could say that was difficult to do, very difficult to actually predict and do, but between us we managed to get that done. But if this is you're down in the 3 and 4, people knew each other personally. You look through somebody in the eye and say, can we do it? And the answer is yes, you have to. I mean, there are other incidences of that across it. It happens all the time inside operations like yourselves. Small scale, in some places you say, we've got a problem, can we solve it? Well, if you don't trust the people around you, you don't do it. It becomes increasingly important, I think, geotechnically. Because unless the geotechnic specialist knows or understands your scenario, what the people you're talking to, how you're going to do it, it's going to take time to build up that trust. And I think we've got examples across AI where it's been very difficult to get that in place. And I'm not entirely certain that all the right decisions were made.
We better move on from that as quickly as before we upset a lot of AI people in the room. But
Well, there's a lot of AI people, but this is past your time. So I'm talking about the past, long past, in many ways.
So in the short answer, I think you need to spend a bit more than 290 now.
Yeah. No, thank you.
But if you just move.
Yeah, conscious of time, if that's all right, we
Just
can
2 minutes.
fly through it. Yeah.
Don't worry about that.
What do you want to get
Just
on
like the slides I've got there. Yes, yeah, okay, Paul Quinjan, just those people remember, when we read it, Forest National Joint Advisory Committee. It's a collaboration, so just remember that it's a definite collaboration of all all the significant producers of agriculture across the UK have representatives on these committees, not all of them turn up. But there are a large number of committees, so subcommittees. The main committee only meets once or twice a year. And so over 20 people on that committee. One thing you have to bear in mind that the health and safety executive in this current situation and this current finances hardly turn up at all. And that's a serious worry for us all. You've only got three quarry inspectors working at the moment.
3 inspectors, yeah.
2 qualified, one's coming up.
Yeah.
One
Senior ones thinking of retiring anyway.
what it should do. He's in a position he ought to be. He's been over permanent. And so we haven't got, so it's all got to be generated internally inside the industry. What we're actually doing. So we're working on that. And we have these working groups, drilling, blasting, contractors, leadership quality. And obviously myself and Steve here are associated with the geotechnical, which is one of the most active committees. Largely because we're in everything. And so it's very difficult to get in everything. But since 2009, they've been reducing guidance. These are the list of the published pieces of guidance that you can go online and get. I'm not going to go through all those. The 2 I've actually contacted, they should come next time. Yeah, well, press the button again, it should fade out. Yeah. The geotechnical sub-audit. People don't know what I'm talking about. It's worth picking up the geotechnical self-audit and trying to work that through it for yourselves or the operations you're working in, because it talks about things you should have in place, things you know about, whether you've got those or whether you don't, do you know to find them. We did the self audit, was actually promoted by the Institute of Quarrying in 2017, 2018, and we had a very good response from at the time. But it's very worrying that over 30% of people saying we don't think we comply. We don't even know how to get compliant in some areas. And some of the quarry management level people were quite concerned about that. And so that's ricocheted around a bit. And it's come forward again.
This is all on the website, John, isn't it?
It's all on the website. You can pick them up. It's all free. Free, you just pick it up. The other one I would like to do with, if you want to know what your geotechnical hazards are, Regulation 32, geotechnical appraisals, should tell everybody in the room the appraisals that have been reduced to searching for significant hazards and non-significant hazards. We should be able to read those appraisals. I do a lot of training, done a lot of training over the years, since 2008. But the number of times I ask them, have your operators talk to you about the hazards that are on your site? There's often a complete and utter silence. It's a requirement of Regulation 32 that the operator tells everybody or makes available to everybody the geotechnical appraisals, which is the assessment of the hazards, the geotechnical hazards you have on your site. So if you, those are pieces of guidance that have been produced. Next one, just to click on where we're going. That's the published, to be published in 2014. We have these two pieces of guidance which think are, if we can get agreement on, which is one of those, guidance on the geotechnical assessments. That cost us perhaps 5 years of discussion. I could say the first piece of guidance came out in 2009, which was on safe working with faces. It took more like 6 years, and we didn't really agree. It was forced out. This one is a piece of guidance we hope to get agreement. It's been agreed, 60% of it's in place. But one of the burning contentions which was touched on is the codification of assessment. The only available codes that are used for design inside the UK at the moment are Euro codes. It's, oh gosh, Euro codes, that's the European Union. No, it's the code, the only code we have across the UK.
That's a whole new presentation.
Oh yes, the whole new presentation. But you'll hear people talking about it. I think I'm with Steve here. Nothing much will change if we adopt the Euro code, but it will align geotechnical assessments. You can say that when you're talking geotechnical assessments, to some extent, we will have to codify how they're done so people can track back and say, how did you come to these conclusions? And the other one that we're working on, and so you don't have to worry about that too much, but certainly geotechnical specialists have to worry about that because, again, in regulation, in the guidance of regulation, they say that you should work to agreed codes, British standards. The old codes used to be British standards. All those have been now incorporated inside the Euro codes. Those that we've adopted. So the way forward is there. The other one is the preparation for geotechnical emergencies. Over the last few years, with extreme events coming in, and that sort of thing, that people have been sitting there, why do we have these extreme events? Extreme weather conditions, wind, rain, changing in patterns. The number of geotechnical problems that might generate inside your site are, need to be thought about and have to have an emergency plan. I don't know if you work in your own communities or if you're working on local council run or environmental management, they want you to have a plan. Don't make it up as you go along. And for geotechnical emergencies, they will be remote. They're not going to be something that's going to happen every day. It may only happen once in a career. But if you have a plan for it, say you lost your main haul road, say in a sand and gravel or a sand and gravel site, we had a 1 in 100 year storm and you were flooded out. How would you recover people from the bottom of the pit if you couldn't get up the wall?
This job's going to be a a piece of.
Well, this is just, it's saying, you know, we can't tell you what will happen to your sites, but they are saying, we'll give examples in these, this particular one for other people which other sites will put in. They'll say, well, we had this emergency. And AI, I don't know if you will go back that far where we had, out there in Milton Keynes at Lake Buzzards, where the Globally pit, they had a major flood, local small stream, small river immediately adjacent, sim overtopped, flooded the entire pit. Really took out the entire plant, flooded the entire plant. You know, that happened in hours. No one ever thought it would have happened. That was the obvious it's going to happen. And then floodplain could happen at any time. Woodall Spa flooded exactly the same way. Major flood. Now, water is a nice one to pick on because we get major storms at the moment. People are flooding all over the UK, so it's water flooding.
When is guidance going to be ready, John? Is it sort of-
Well, this piece of guidance we hope, well, these both will be published next year. So they'll come out. All the other guidance is there. The other guidance is being reviewed in 2009. So you will see that being updated as well. What I really suppose to say the message here is though is, I don't think I put it here, is engagement. Which also it's Quinjet. If you get a chance to make contributions to Quinjet, it would be great. Because what you want is feedback from people who are out there to say, well, this is a piece of guidance nobody uses, it's rubbish, it doesn't work for us. Or quite the alternatively, what we need is a piece of guidance that's going to direct us related to the problem I have in this particular location.
Well, on that note, I wonder if that's something we can look to finish on is kind of around the room. Is there any particular topic or field which people would appreciate Kinjet to issue some advice on? You know, specifically in the geotechnical work.
Oh, you're looking specifically, you say there's a whole series of other committees that are working, blasting, contractors, worker engagement. These are all.
Absolutely, yeah. Probably more for yourself, John.
Yeah.
Both on the Kinjet committee. So if there are any geotechnical, topics or guidance, if there's anything people have got, please feed it back to John and Steve tonight. I'm conscious of time.
Yeah,
That
okay.
it's dark. Yeah. So no, I don't want to rush you, but
No,
thank you very much, and we'll probably draw it to a close there. Then, unless there's anything else, any more questions for Steve or John? No. In that case, if we can just have the usual round of applause, so thank you.